Okay, so this is a low carbohydrate diet part here. I haven't seen anyone ask any questions about or show any interest, so I probably won't include low carbohydrate diets in Nimbuster News anymore. I'll just post YouTubes or something of doctors and scientists that are researching it. So I'm gonna go through the whole thing right now, answer some questions. First place, everybody said it's a fad diet. Low carbohydrates, a fad diet. It started, well, low carbohydrate diets have been seen in ancient Egypt. In Egypt, there was known to be a lot of fat people, particularly the pharaohs, were tended to be overweight. And when anthropologists looked at it, they looked at the mummies, and a lot of them had atherosclerosis and a lot of the diseases that modern humans have in the United States. And after looking at their diet, they find out mostly it was plant-based. It was fruits and grains. Egypt's known for storing grains. Matter of fact, let's see, one of the they had 7-year famine in Egypt, and the pharaohs stored grain. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Most people are religious, remember something like that. Anyway, grain was one of the things that they ate a lot of, and they had the same type of diseases we did. And one of the cures for diabetes, which I don't believe they call it diabetes, something else at that time, was a low carbohydrate diet. They didn't have insulin, so only way to save your ass if you got diabetes back in that time was to go on a low carbohydrate diet. So it's been known about that's like 3,500 years ago. But more recently, in our time in modern recorded history, it started off with a Canadian explorer named Wilhelmer Stephenson, and he was studying the Indians, the Inuit Indians around Canada and Alaska, and he lived with them for like years at a time, like 2 years at a time, ate what they did whatever the hell they did, and studied them. The Indians would store, well, the ones he was with, there's different, or not the Indians, the Eskimos, there was different, they ate different shit depending on where they're at, but where the one he was at, they ate mostly fish. They'd catch fish and throw them inside of a something that was bear-proof, and they'd freeze. And then during the winter, they would go inside and they'd thaw the fish out. They ate these fucking fish raw, and he describes thawing them out, pulling the skin off, and eating the meat. They didn't eat the internal organs. The heads, they saved for the kids because it was considered a delicacy. So that's not all the kids ate, but that's one thing they did. They gave them a fish head, like a candy bar or something. But they had no plant material and no carbohydrates for like 6 months at a time, but they didn't show any signs of malnutrition or anything. This is one thing that he actually took back to the United States. He stayed on a low carbohydrate diet, and they actually studied him in hospitals. They put him and his buddy Karsten Anderson in a room in the hospital to make sure they ate nothing but low carbohydrate. And I remember one time reading that there was a pneumonia that went through the place. Now, back in 1910, 1915, pneumonia was a lot more deadly than it is now. And they were scared that these guys that were on this low carbohydrate diet would have compromised immune systems. They were afraid that they might die from it. What happened was pneumonia did spread through the hospital. Both of them only got a mild case of it and recovered, where the people that were on the regular diet had much more severe case of it. So you can say that the low carbohydrate diet started around 1910. More recently, Atkins' new diet revolution started in the 70s with Dr. Atkins writing about a low carbohydrate diet. And if you look today, there's hundreds and hundreds of books about low carbohydrate dieting. The most common ones right now are Dr. Atkins' A New Diet Revolution, Good Calories, Bad Calories, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living by Jeff Volek, Sugar Nation, Paleo Fitness, Pigskin Paleo, The Protein Power Life Plan, Mining My Mitochondria, Pure White and Deadly, which describes sugar, Keto Clarity, The Paleo Miracle. There's literally hundreds of books right now on low carbohydrate dieting. And it'd be a stretch of the imagination to call it a fad diet, something that's over 100 years old. At some point, you have to quit calling it a fad and start calling it a fact. And if it's People have been doing it for 100 years, and there's still been no adverse effects anyone has ever been able to measure on a low carbohydrate diet. So I'm going to go over this one more time. Most people were designed to be a 4-season creature, at least have a winter that was difficult to get through. During the fall, which obviously preceded winter, there was a higher number of carbohydrates in the environment. That's when fruit ripened. That's when tubers ripened. That's when hunter-gatherer species ate more carbohydrates. As an evolutionary adaptation to surviving through winter with no food, the rise in insulin triggered the body to store fat. Insulin is a fat storage hormone. Not only does it unlock your cells and allow them to uptake glycogen, it also stores fat. It also makes fat out of sugar. So insulin is a fat storage hormone, which is a good idea if you are a hunter-gatherer species and there's going to be very little food available for winter. But the problem comes when you are preparing for winter constantly, when you prepare for winter for decades at a time. In most people, their entire life, their body thinks they're preparing for winter. So obviously what then happens is you start gaining weight. Your insulin levels stay high for extended periods of time, for years and years on end. Okay, eventually what happens is that your cells become resistant to insulin. It's like someone that's an alcoholic. You drink and it takes more to get you fucked up, takes more and more. Pretty soon you can drink half a bottle, pretty soon you can drink a whole bottle. You become resistant to alcohol. Your cells do the same thing. You get insulin, more and more insulin, they start getting resistant to it. Pretty soon they tell you fuck off. And the insulin does not affect the cells as it used to. So your blood sugar rises. Well, when your blood sugar rises, the only thing that you can do about it now, or according to modern science, is inject insulin into you. So the problem is that you have high insulin levels for too long of a period, made your cells become resistant to insulin. So the cure that modern science has is to inject more insulin. And the low carbohydrate solution to this is to eat no or less carbs, dropping your insulin level, allowing your cells to become sensitive to insulin again. That's like weaning an alcoholic off the bottle rather than giving him more alcohol for the shakes. So the idea is to improve your insulin resistance, and you do that by not eating carbohydrates. Modern treatment of diabetes is a treatment. Doesn't seek to cure you. I've never heard of anyone that went from insulin resistance to taking oral diabetes medications like metformin to slamming insulin that ever got better. The treatment is not to make you well. The treatment is to keep you from dying from high sugar levels. And the insulin actually causes other problems like high blood pressure, weight gain. The sugar levels fuck your kidneys up. This is all grouped into something called metabolic syndrome. Anyone that has fat around their midsection, has high blood pressure, has insulin resistance, has metabolic syndrome. Although the treatment is to shoot up insulin to increase the amount of fat storage hormone that you have in your body, that's the treatment for it. That's not the cure. The cure is to improve insulin resistance. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in the world would benefit from going on a low carbohydrate diet, but because it depends on where your ancestors came from, it depends on your particular genetic makeup, it depends on the amount of aerobic exercise you do, a lot of factors. If you happen to not be overweight, not have any of the symptoms of metabolic syndrome, fine, eat whatever you want, bags of sugar, candy bars, Fruit Loops, whatever the fuck, that's fine. If you're not there where you need to be, which 68.8% of the population of the United States is obese and or has metabolic syndrome, then you might consider doing something else. If your ancestors came from the Pacific Islands or in tropical region, someplace where they didn't actually have winter, then you're less likely to be sensitive to carbohydrates. Now, one thing got to understand here is there is not a single low carbohydrate diet. There's many, many offshoots of it. The most mild form of carbohydrate diet will tell you to eat less than 100 carbohydrates a day A lot of people will improve their insulin sensitivity and lose weight on that. If you're not too bad off metabolically, that might work. Most of the time, the threshold there's 50 carbs, where people respond a lot better there. Then you get down to where it's considered strict carbohydrate, which is Dr. Atkins and Volek. A lot of the other ones say less than 20 carbohydrates a day, and to try and spread that out over the day so that it doesn't raise your insulin as much and your cells don't become resistant to it. Then you move on over into zero carb, that's where I try to be at. I do eat some lettuce and celery and radishes once in a while. I'm not perfect, but try and keep carbohydrates to zero, or not over 5 or 10 a day. That's considered zero carb diet. Then you go to fuckers that are zero carb but only will eat raw meat, will not touch any vegetables at all. They'll eat raw meat almost exclusively. Then, in order everyone has to take things to extreme here. You get into the people that go into intermittent fasting. Okay, so the idea is to make your cells less resistant to insulin. And almost anything can raise your insulin level a little bit. Even protein can raise your insulin level a little bit. Okay, fat won't. But protein in the fat can raise your insulin levels a little bit. So the only way to get around this is to either eat only fat, which most people can't do, or not eat at all. So in order to improve their insulin resistance, and there's other reasons to lose weight and other shit, people will not eat, or will only eat in certain periods, windows they call. Like one of the common ones is a 23-1, where you won't eat 23 hours a day, you'll eat one. And then some people will go 36 hours between, and they'll only eat once. Some people go out to 3 days without eating after they are been on a low carbohydrate diet. Don't try and do this unless you know what ketosis is and about ketogenic diets, or you could really fuck yourself up. But they'll get into ketosis and they'll go 3 days without eating, and then they'll eat once, and they'll go 3 more days. Okay, so that's a longer intermittent fasting, but this is really getting your cells back to being sensitive to insulin, because this is dropping your insulin levels as low as possible. I did hear of this one lady that went on vacation. She's a zero carb, raw meat, intermittent fasting type, low carb person, and she went on vacation for a month and ate 5 times during that fucking month, and she's skinny. She does it for other reasons. She has other health problems that are treated with a low carbohydrate diet. One of the leaders now of the curing diabetes movement is Dr. Jason Fung. He, in his book, he starts patients off with 3-day fasts, and he's had a fairly successful cure rate. He's a nephrologist. Matter of fact, I'm reading a book right now about him. Let's see what the hell's it called. It's called The Obesity Code. So far, that's the only book that he's written, but he goes deeper into metabolic resistance and how to make your cells more sensitive to insulin. And you got to realize, just not eating carbs might not be enough if you're real sensitive. Like I was saying, protein can raise your insulin levels. So probably the most successful group of low carbers there is called low carb high fat, where they keep the carbohydrates under 20 but try and eat as much fat as they can. They judge this by when they get sick. So I mean, concentrating on fat, eating fat, is a way to drop your insulin levels, and those fuckers lose weight very quickly. I'd like to see one of those on The Biggest Loser. If you've ever seen this on TV, where dudes that weigh like 500 pounds and they lose like 50 pounds in 1 week. Low carbohydrate dieters, I bet you could pretty much match this and not lift a finger. The thing that most people don't realize, because it's been spread by the government and health nuts and stuff for a long time, is you don't have to exercise to lose weight. That is a freaking fallacy. You probably can't be healthy if you don't exercise, but losing weight and exercising is not something that's going to work very well. So if you went out and ran for an hour, you weighed 175 pounds, you ran for an hour, you'd burn about 800 calories. Now, I don't know how many hours a day you plan on running. One Big Mac has 600 calories in it. The thought here is it's far easier and far more effective to change the way you eat than it is to increase exercise level. I mean, if you wanted to eat an extra Big Mac, you'd have to run for an hour in order to remove the amount of calories that Big Mac put on you. And what happens whenever you go on a low carbohydrate diet is your insulin levels fall. Insulin is a fat storage hormone. It also, consequently, since you're preparing for winter, the more that you eat, the better. When you go on a low carbohydrate diet and you don't eat carbohydrates anymore, your hunger level falls. Most people that are on carbohydrate diets don't eat more than 12 to 1400 calories a day voluntarily. They can't eat more. They've even paid people to eat and see if they could gain weight on a low carbohydrate diet, although they did manage to get people to gain a few pounds. Over the people lost the weight again. Nature does not actually want you to have weight on you unless you're preparing for winter. The rest of the time, it easily wants to get rid of it. You benefit as a species. If you're too fat, you can't fuck. You can't run away from predators. You can't kill animals. It's not good for you to be overweight as a survival adaptation.